We want to have a conversation about the cost of power or energy in the country. We've had this several conversations here. I mean, it's all over in the public domain. You know, the cost of power is very high. Why is the cost of power very high? Even the former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, was told the cost of power, Mr. President, is very high. He said, huh? Let me actually find out. He sets up a task force. He tells them, go and find out why the cost of power is high. They come back and say, yes, indeed, the cost of power is high. But you know what, Mr. President? It could come down. One of the challenges that we've realized is that the people who are selling power to Kenya Power, some of those people entered into some long-term contract with Kenya Power and they were opaque. Due to the opaqueness of this, 0.01% of what should be going there becomes 144,000. And becomes what? An issue. Now, we've also looked at the breakdown when you buy power tokens. Kenya Power now has stopped doing the breakdown.
It's now a consolidated.
Now they're consolidating the breakdown into one amount.
Yeah.
Way.
So you decide if you're thinking X amount goes to surcharge or, water levy. It's okay.
Just tell you levies X. Previously, before they started doing that, they were giving us the breakdown. The breakdown included inflation, rural electrification program, the Water Resources Authority, the regulator EPRA, and then there were two elements there: forex charge and fuel energy charge. And those two, are contributing to a huge significance of what you've actually paid over. And the devil has been painted as one entity. Independent power producers. Those leeches.
Those
came in here.
Those parasites.
Came in here and they're selling power and they have entered into some deal and they're making all the money and we're paying all that money. They've never had an opportunity to speak. Today we've brought them so they can speak. And George Aluru is the chairman of the Electricity Sector Association of Kenya, which brings together independent power producers and professionals in that sector. George, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Asante sana.
That's the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Yep.
Power producers, especially the thermal power producers,
Yep.
you burn fuel to produce energy.
Yes.
We are not going to burn you here, but we hope that at least we'll get some energetic conversation.
Yeah.
To welcome you to the conversation, C.T. Muga is this week giving us proverbs from a certain book by Chinua Achebe.
The book, it's a famous book, 20 million copies in print and
counting.
Yes. It hasn't quite caught up with the Bible, whose sales are in the billions, something around 5 billion, but it's there. And my peculiar interest in the book is because when it was first published on the 17th of June, 1958, I had been born 3 months prior. So we are age mates. Yes. Now, this week's proverbs have all come from that particular book. Things fall apart. Now, today's proverb: let the kite perch, let the eagle perch too. If one says no to the other, let his wings break. Let the kite perch, let the eagle perch too. If one says no to the other, let his wings break.
George.
Tafakari ya babu.
What's your interpretation of this proverb?
Well, that there's two sets of eagles in this case, or things that fly, and both of them have their right to perch. And if one blocks the other, then let the other's wings break.
Let the blocker's wings break.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's saying there's room for everyone. Yeah.
Should be accommodating.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's room for everyone to play in this.
Yeah. In whichever
branch of a tree.
sense, or whether it's an industry or space you think of. Yeah.
Okay. Now with that, introduce us to the Electricity Sector Association of Kenya.
Yeah. Thank you. The Electricity Sector Association of Kenya is an association of investors in the electricity sector. So I say that because there's often this misconception that independent power producers are only the thermal plants, and that's where all the focus goes. But as an association, we have membership from those independent power producers, and for the sake of the general public, independent power producers are private people who put money into generation of electricity. And this could be using HFO, the thermal plants that people often refer to. It could be wind, it could be solar, it could be bioenergy, and there's different sorts of independent power producers in the country already. We have something like 20 years of history with independent power producers, actually 20 plus, more than 20 years. Then we also have membership from the developers of captive plants. So captive plants are power plants that are built, let's say, on top of a shopping mall or an industry, meant to supply them captively. So it's their own use, and they might export some bit to the grid. And this can be wind, can be solar, can be hydro. So it's also different technologies. And then, of course, we also have membership from all the advisory people around power development, lawyers, financial advisors, etc. Yeah, we are now about three years old. And basically, we work in power generation, in transmission and distribution, what we call electricity markets, which is where now we try to push thought leadership on what's the next step for our market in terms of how the structure of the market is. And then finally also in CNI or captive, so commercial and industrial, the people doing captive plants.
Okay. How many members do you have?
At present, we have 41 members. And it cuts across companies and a few individuals. There are some individuals who are of kind of knowledgeable people in the sector that we also admit as members.
Okay. Yeah. How many of those 41 members are actually power producers?
Of those, it depends in the context you're asking, because there are power producers who have not yet built their power plants. So they are somewhere maybe negotiating a PPA or somewhere in the licensing.
How many are active?
The active ones would be about 8. So we represent just about all the private power producers on the grid. So thermal, wind, solar. Save for, I think, only one is at the moment not our member.
Okay. Yeah. So all those independent power producers are actually already signed up members.
Yes, they are.
Of the association.
Yes, they are.
Okay. Now let's again go ahead and break down some more. So you've told us, let's not only think about thermal. Yeah. There's also wind power producers and those who are using solar and the rest. Yeah. What's a bigger majority?
In terms of installed capacity, or
in terms of this 8 active members?
Yeah.
Is it thermal, wind, or solar that is represented more?
I would say for the ones that are operating, we have all the thermal plants. We have all the big wind farms. So it's 2 wind farms, basically, Electrocana and Kipeto. And then all the solar plants outside of what is not Kengen or Rerek. Okay. So all the solars in Eldoret, the solar in Malindi, all these are our members.
Okay.
Yep.
And Kengen is not a member?
No, as I said, it's a representation of the private
sector.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Okay. So the issue here has been on how these companies, the independent power producers, enter into agreement or power purchase agreements with the distributor of power, which is Kenya Power. Okay. And the kind of negotiations that take place. Yeah. What is the overall nature of the kind of relationship that Kenya Power, on one hand, has with any of these independent producers, whether it's wind, solar, thermal?
Yeah. So good question, actually. So I think the first thing would be just to describe what a power purchase agreement is. So basically, the relationship between an independent power producer and Kenya Power is a supplier and customer kind of relationship, So the independent power producer would set up a plant and commit to supply a certain amount of electricity with certain technical parameters, which go with quality, with availability, things like that. And then KPLC would then commit to buy that power and sell it to its customer network. So going back to a PPA, is a power purchase agreement. So basically, this is a contract that defines the relationship between these two parties and other related activities like contingent liability of the state, etc., things like that. So and a PPA basically is a document that allocates risk to the person who's best suited to handle it. Mm-hmm. So on the one side, you have the independent power producer, who now you have the responsibility to produce power, as I mentioned, of a certain quality, and be available for a certain period, and you get a guarantee of a certain price at which you sell this power over a certain period. Normally, this could be 20, 25 years. Mm. And then on the other side, you have KPLC. Now, KPLC is in charge of ensuring that there's demand. Mm. So it's their job to forecast demand. Mm. And based on that, they would then go out and look for a power plant that will be able to meet that demand. And then the other things, now you start talking around the ifs. What if this happens? Who bears the cost? So basically, and I know the one famous one that people really like to refer to is something we call take or pay, which is if my power plant is ready to produce power, and for some reason, beyond what we call a connection point, is where your responsibility as the IPP end. If for some reason anything beyond that connection point causes KPLC to be unable to take the power, then they still pay. Because it's not, I'm not able to control the risk beyond that point. It's on the KPLC network. Okay. And in the same case, and this is now where people never actually look into, in the same way, if KPLC projects a certain demand, and you told them that tomorrow, because you do these schedules almost daily, you tell them tomorrow what you will produce. And you told them tomorrow I'll produce, let's say, 100, and you are not able to produce. And it's not an act of God. There's no earthquake that has happened. There's no major thing that would affect you that has happened. Then you are liable to pay KPLC for not being available to produce. So it's a balanced contract. So it has liabilities on both sides and penalties on both sides. And the overall concept is just identify the risk, who's the best placed person to handle that risk. And so roughly that's what a PPA.
George, by way of explainer, so help us understand this, because there are folks who understand. Okay, so in this chain, where then are the IPPs? Where are you? Where is your link? What exactly then do you provide in terms of a service? Yeah. Because when we think power, we think KPLC. Yeah. When we think power generation, we think KenGen. Yeah. All right? So then in this chain, where are you and what exactly do you do? Beyond the parameters and the contracts, how then does the Kenyan who is paying a bill then regard you, or how should they, in terms of your purpose?
Also a good question. I think first you have to understand the structure of the electricity sector. So in the past we used to have KPLC that did everything. They generated, they transmitted, they distributed, they collected money from you, retail. Then around 90s we started reforms where we broke down and we now have a separate generator, KenGen. We have Ketraco, now this came later. Ketraco is the transmitter. Then you have KPLC, which now plays the role of distribution and retail. So they take power from the higher voltage substations to the lower voltage substations close to your house and distribute power to you. So independent power producers are generators. So the thing is we and KenGen do the same job. We build power plants and supply that power to KPLC.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm interested in knowing.
Yes.
This business of power production, it's a business.
It's a business, yes.
How does one qualify?
How does one qualify?
Yes.
There is a process. It depends on the technology first. So, but the popular one, renewable energy, today there's some changes that are happening, but it used to have a process called the feed-in tariff. where you identify a site, you go out, you do your technical studies, you survey, you see where the wind is good or the sun is good, you find land, you find people who are willing to sell or lease you land, then you draft an application to the Ministry of Energy for something called an expression of interest. You express your interest to develop a power plant. Then they will send a team, they will review, and they will approve and give you timelines over which you should start your feasibility studies. So you then go, you do studies, you do environmental studies, you do technical studies around the quality of the resource that you're using to produce the power. Then you do grid studies, whether you'll be able to put this power into the KPLC grid, and many other studies. Then you also go to KPLC. Once you're done with these studies, you go back to the ministry and tell them, okay, I've done my technical studies. They are good. I think they are good. Can I then proceed to talk to KPLC over a PPA? Then you go to KPLC, you negotiate your PPA, you find an agreement. This agreement then goes through several bodies. So it's not just the KPLC board.
I don't want to sell to KPLC. I'm not interested.
Okay.
But I live in a community and we have a small fall. Okay? Mm-hmm. And I've been told by people who understand it that fall, the power of that water is sufficient to turn a turbine to generate electricity. Yeah. So I want it for the consumption of myself and my neighbors.
Yeah, so I mean, when it's yourself, it's okay. I mean, you so long as you're within a certain limit of capacity of the power plant, you just need to notify the regulator that you're doing this power plant. It's not big, it's for yourself. But once you start distributing to others, your neighbors, etc., then there's some risk. Yeah, so
what is this?
It's regulated. That you can supply, let's say, power in your house is supplied at 240 volts. Then your machines, for some reason, they supply them at 400 and your neighbor's TV gets burnt. Who's supposed to regulate that?
My neighbor.
No, the regulator. That's why when you start pushing out to others, then you have to come under regulation.
Where I'm going with this.
I see where you're going.
You see where I'm going with this. Exactly. Because when you talk about there being a grid that you now need to go through this lengthy process to be allowed into and to sell to Kenya Power.
Yeah.
First of all, what Kenya Power is willing to pay? How much is this subject to negotiation? Or does Kenya Power have the monopoly to tell you this is what we're going to pay you? And if you don't like it, tough.
Yeah. So initially, as I said, there was a feed-in tariff, which now caps up a price. It tells you this is the price that you'll sell at.
Why?
But now we are moving into an auction process. So where you
are we there?
Bid.
Or we're talking about going there?
We are talking about going there. I think the cabinet passed a resolution, I think, last month to actually
2 weeks ago, I think. Yeah. The cabinet meeting of 2 weeks ago, yes.
Yeah.
What is this feed-in tariff?
Basically, a feed-in tariff is an agreed tariff by which you would sell electricity to KPLC. And the idea of a feed-in tariff is to encourage markets that probably people hadn't invested in, to give them some kind of guaranteed price that allows them to work their numbers in terms of returns and how they would pay their loans. So feed-in tariff, in this case, was brought in to encourage renewable energy. And there hadn't been many investments in renewable energy in the past. And when this tariff came in, then the investors are able to project and they have a bit of confidence in terms of the returns that allows them now to build wind and solar. And it has been largely successful. I think this is one of the things that as a country we never kind of acknowledge, that in the region we probably have the biggest wind farms, the biggest solar farms. And this would have not been possible were it not for us having like a progressive feed-in tariff regime.
Okay.
I appreciate it fully. But then at the end of the day, what then concerns us, all these things are wonderful and they're good.
Yeah.
Renewable energy, green energy, we are right up there on the planet.
Yeah.
Understandable.
Okay.
Cost.
Yes.
How does this feed into the cost so that at the end of the day, all these activities are geared towards guaranteeing us electricity?
Yeah.
But at what cost?
Well, good point. Now, feed-in tariff, as I said, they are meant to encourage people to come into a nascent market. Once you have people already there, then you shift to a competitive process, like a tendering process. And tendering allows you to have price discovery. Because you will come with your power plant, Eric will come with his, and I will come with mine, and we'll try to undercut each other. And whoever has the best price or combination of price and other social factors you'd want to put in such a tender process wins and gets to build. And in that way, price then tends to go down. But price itself, you have to look at it from two sides. There's the side of the generator, the generation cost, and then there's the side of the consumer. What now Kenyans know, what
At the bill.
I heard you don't get a proper breakdown for these
Yeah.
days. So on the one side, on the consumer side, there's the generation cost, and then there's the pass-through costs, and then there's the taxes and things like that. So as generators, we are probably influencing the generation cost and some of the pass-through costs.
That was my question, because then to say that when you look at all of this, it is a cost.
Yeah.
There's no reprieve or relief in any of this,
Yeah.
and then all translate to a really high bill. It doesn't matter how we try to slice it.
Yeah.
The electricity, the energy costs in this country
Yeah.
are extremely high. Whether you want to do a comparative analysis or whether you just want to look at what Kenyans are able to then afford to have the lights on in their homes.
Yeah.
Truth of the matter,
Yeah.
how do the IPPs, or rather, what weight of the cost comes from you all?
Well, I don't have the exact number, but
So if we're looking at the pie, then we've cut it into pieces.
Yeah.
I'm looking at, and the pie being my bill.
yes.
What responsibility of that cost then is on your shoulders as IPPs, and is it necessary for it to be so high?
First, I think that the only reference I can give is that Kenya Power puts it at 64% of the bill, and that's both IPP and KenGen. And then the IPP and KenGen split. I think we've all seen the debate around supplying. I don't know. There's a 45 and 60% number around how much we supply and how much we are paid.
Yeah.
So that's how the split goes for that 64%. But in itself, I mean, we are selling electricity. So if you're selling electricity, or let me like refer to something simple. If you order for KFC today, there'll be the cost of bringing the chicken and chips to you, and the cost of the chicken and chips. So you want that the cost of the chicken and chips is the higher part of that cost.
Yeah.
It's not like the delivery should be higher than the product
cost of the
itself.
product.
Or even it shouldn't even be equal.
And that's the understanding that 64%, of course, it's justified because that is the product. The rest is actually just the delivery to you. And so that's one aspect, one way you can look at it. But then now there are ways you can try to reduce this cost. And I think that's where now the conversation
This
is,
is
I
the
guess,
crux
is
of the matter.
more important.
Yeah.
So there's the levies and taxes, and that we have to look into the way we collect revenue as a country. Those are the taxes that are there, the whatever agencies that need to be supported off of the bill. And then there's the generation cost, which now goes back to competitive tendering and ensuring that only the most efficient power plant gets built. But again, this is not something that you can solve in one day. And we saw what the task force, the report they came up with, the recommendations they had, I would rather say rash decision to just say 15% reduction without any basis on it. And then eventually you end up with a utility that's not able to meet its obligations. And then now when you let's say when you deny a justified kind of increase over time, and then you load it up to a moment, then when that moment comes, the increase is big, and everybody will complain.
It's going to be a big one.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Bottle it for a
Eric
bit.
wants to
Yeah,
go
let's
on a
take a
break.
break.
I'll-
It's 28 minutes to 8. This is Kenya's biggest conversation. George Aluru is the chairman of the Electricity Sector Association of Kenya. This is an association that brings together all private sector players in the power sector, and these are the independent power producers. This also brings in the professionals in the sector, the lawyers who deal with this, the engineers and all. They all come together for 41 members. We are talking about the cost of power in Kenya and what role this private sector cabal, as they've been called by many, has with this. it's a costly investment to actually put up a power plant, isn't it?
It is. Yeah,
It's a huge one. You'll tell us about that.
Yeah.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
The chairman of the Electricity Sector Association of Kenya talking about the power bills. Let's do that breakdown quickly, George, right? So that we understand your contribution to the electricity that we consume on a daily basis. So there are 8 active independent power producers, and these include wind, thermal, solar. Who's the largest, and how much do they contribute to the grid? And who's the smallest, how much do they contribute to the grid? Just off the top of your head.
So the largest is Lake Turkana wind farm, 300 megawatt installed capacity.
That's the installed capacity.
Yes, that's the installed capacity. Yeah.
How
Then-
much are they actually putting into the
Well,
grid?
there's something called a capacity factor, which like shows you how much of that percentage is produced. And typically for a wind farm, that and this is a global standard, it would be like 35% of that. So, but Lake Turkana, since it's a very, very good wind site, I think it does something like 58%, between 50 and 58%. So it's one of probably the best wind farms in terms of production in the world.
So around 150.
Yeah,
Or thereabouts.
on average. And
On
that,
average.
that means if you count the number of hours in a year, for that about 60% of the time they would be producing. That's and then basically renewable energy works like that. That you have, let's say, 100 megawatt in solar installed, but the capacity factor would be something like 25%. Yeah, so
Depending on the sun.
yeah.
So Lake Turkana is the
biggest.
biggest
In terms of the
independent.
smallest, I'm not sure which one exactly, but it should be a mini hydro plant that would be, I would say, something like 200 kilowatt, a small plant. And those would be, you typically find them installed in the rural areas.
Okay.
Yeah.
These ones that are called thermal,
Yes, thermal.
what are they and how much do they contribute to the grid?
Thermal power plants, basically they burn heavy fuel oil to produce electricity. They typically, the ones that are in Kenya are about 70, 100 megawatt. And there's, I think, 5 of them. The total number could be like 200 and something. I don't know the exact. Yeah, but let me just go back to explain, I think, because this is important to understand how power production works. And to understand how power production works, you have to take the analogy of a car hire. So you have a car. You want to, I don't know, you want to drive somewhere, you want whatever. You have the choice of buying your own car or going to a car hire and hiring a car. When you hire a car, then you have a charge that you pay every day. So whether you drive this car or you park it at your house, you will still pay a certain amount.
Okay.
If you drive it, then you incur the fuel cost. Then you have to put fuel in it and you pay for that. So if one guy would drive it for 1,000 kilometers, then their cost per kilometer would be lower. If you park it, then your cost per kilometer would be higher because you're still paying the 10,000. I'm assuming now your hiring cost is 10,000 every day.
Okay.
So and this is where when we start to compare like thermal plants and other plants, we miss the mark, because thermal plants are generally designed to be peaking plants. Peaking plants mean that the grid, the way we load our power plants onto the grid is like a sandwich. So you start with the what we call the base load plants. These are hydro, geothermal. You put them first on the grid and they start supplying. Then you have the renewable energy plants, which come before these ones, because they have a right of supply, kind of a fast right of supply. So if there's wind or solar, that power is taken fast onto the grid.
Okay.
Then when demand is growing, and it's, let's say it's 7 a.m., people are coming into the offices, switching on the devices, factories are working, so demand starts to grow. And demand peaks at night when the factories are working and all of us go home and we switch on everything.
Yeah.
So at that point, you're in a situation where you've put in all your geothermal is online, your solar is off because it's night, and then you now still have a demand to meet. So you switch on this thermal plants, the peaking plants, to support you over that period that demand is high. And the other time when you run these thermal plants is when you have voltage issues, like what we experience in Western Kenya. That's why we have the Moroni plant, and then also what we experience at the coast, and that's why you find the power plant at Rabai gets run a lot. So thermal plants are not meant to be base load plants. So the more you run them, the more the cost to you. And
so they're not supposed to be always on.
Exactly.
Always on the grid.
Not
They should only be coming to the grid when you have like exhausted
yes,
everything else that is coming.
And
starting
again,
with the renewables and then into
you put in everything else, and then you turn these thermal plants on because now you need them.
Okay.
Like today we need them because we are in a drought. Our hydros are doing very bad. So you find that the thermal plants will be run more because the hydro is suffering. And it could be HFO, it could be LNG, natural gas. So there are different kinds of peaking plants.
Okay.
It's not just the HFO plants. And so if we go back to the car analogy, what we see here as a fuel energy charge is basically saying that you took this car and you drove it. And if you drive it, you pay for the fuel. No independent power producer of the thermal kind benefits from this fuel. Just the same way, when you hire that car and you put fuel in the car hire guy doesn't benefit from the fuel. You do not benefit from the fuel. KPLC doesn't benefit from the fuel. It's the guy who sells the fuel that benefits from the fuel. So I think this is something we must understand. And that's the nature of these pass-through costs. Because, again, if I provide a car for you, if you need to drive it, you will need to put fuel. And again, it's not my fault that...
Okay. So the basic here is that there's a take or pay.
Yes, there's a take or
right?
pay.
So even in this off-peak hours,
Yes.
when you're not bringing in power from this thermal plant into the grid,
Yeah.
the thermal plant, is it on or is it off? Is it generating?
Normally, it's at a very low level
So
because you want it to be hot.
It's
to be
idling.
like, exactly.
It's like idling. The car is idling.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when Kenya Power comes and says, hey guys, there is huge demand, please give me power.
Switch on, yeah.
So they switch on.
Yeah.
And now at that point, they start burning their fuel.
More, yeah.
More of
Yeah,
their fuel.
yeah.
So that's what now you're saying, that they pass on that to Kenya Power and the Kenya Power passes on to the consumer.
Yeah, the fuel cost, the
fuel
cost
cost
of the fuel, and that's why you find in the previous regimes, like when we had Minister Keter or Monica Juma, or even now, the conscious attempt is to try to run these things as low as possible, the thermal plants. But let me also go back to the capacity charge. There's this misconception that it's only the IPPs who are charging capacity charge. It's the same for the geothermals. It's the same for hydro, for thermal. Only wind and solar do not have a capacity charge, but they have something called deemed energy, which kind of works the same way as a capacity charge, which says that you have first right of dispatch whenever you're available, and up to a certain amount, they have to take. Anything above that, then the price halves or something. So they are guaranteed a certain amount of, I would say, dispatch, for lack of a better word.
So who sits around the table when these costs are being determined? Who decides how much this is going to cost?
There are laws. There's the regulator. There's Kenya Power that will negotiate with you. There's you, the investor, who negotiates. There's a financial model that you produce, and this financial model is checked by Kenya Power, is checked by EPRA. In the end, your PPA is checked by the State Law Office. It's checked by National Treasury to ensure that whatever liabilities of the state are managed. So it's not like it's just one person checking these things. And again, this is something we must realize, that there's a whole series of people that go through these PPAs. And I think another thing that I really want people to know is that the independent power producer sector is probably one of the industries that operates on an open book. As in, we send our models to the regulator. We
Open book,
report.
Okay.
John Gumi said he didn't even see the book.
Well, John
The
Gumi
John
said,
Gumi-
I don't speak for John
The
Gumi.
John Gumi team said, Mr. President, we asked for the book. We didn't see the
Who
book.
did they ask?
George, you're saying the book is open.
The book. Tell me, which other industry, in the media industry, do you have a regulator?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
we do.
Do you send to them your financial models on how much you're making in every show, and do you have a projection of 20 years of how that goes, and they approve that and tell you, okay,
See,
this
they're
is
not,
fine, your
they're not
return
buying
is...
our programming,
They're
so
not
we don't have
buying
a power
it.
purchase.
The
program
end
purchase
user in
agreement.
Kenya today,
Yes,
the end
yes,
user
yes,
in
belong to is different from the one
absolutely,
you belong
the end
to.
user in Kenya today, it is George, it is Charles, it is Eric. These are people who are directly vested in the decisions that you're making around the table. That does not include them. And
It
this is what
includes
we are
them.
saying.
It includes them because the government is there
Which was my
also.
Which was my question here. The end user, the millions of Kenyans today who are crying and saying this is ridiculous in terms of how much it's costing that I'm spending. Because now let's get to the nitty gritty of it.
Yes.
Because I'm spending 500 shillings and I'm getting less than 250 shillings worth of power.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So when you're making these decisions about how to divvy up this 250 shillings, which I never see in terms of power, I see it in taxes, there's a road whatever it is that comes from all of this. And I actually don't see the end result of it. When you're sitting around the table, divvying up this 250 shillings, the end user, unfortunately, is not in that conversation. The end user, like you said, the cost is passed on to them because you sit around the table, you have a jolly old good time, then you say, you know what? It's going to cost this much, but what we're going to do is pass it to the end user every time.
First,
Every time.
It's not.
How
It's not
does
very
this-
accurate.
how-
I know it's an emotive topic, but
No,
And I think we need to
actually-
deal with it.
But-
It's
but,
absolutely
may I
important.
reply?
It isn't really emotive.
yeah.
Let me just append a question and add it to Ndu's.
Okay.
What role do you people play in the eventual cost that is passed on to us consumers?
Do you sit and say, actually, you know what, this might be a little bit too much for them this time?
I used 7 liters of fuel
Yeah.
to drive this car today. Or I used 20 liters of fuel to drive the car today.
Doesn't matter. Pass it on.
Yeah. So I'm trying to tell you, stop using your power, let's say, at peak.
Okay.
Or at least shift whatever load you can shift. Like if you're let's say for example, if you're ironing, instead of ironing between 8 and 10, just iron like slightly later.
Iron during the day.
Or slightly later in the night also.
Okay.
That means the demand at that time reduces. So therefore the need to run the thermal plants also reduces. As I said, IPPs don't benefit from the fuel. This fuel goes to the
We
market.
get that. I think the question, George, is at the point of now billing, all right?
Yes.
So whatever the user picked their demand, and then Kenya Power had to address that demand, and then Kenya Power comes to its producers and says, Thermo, please switch on, because I need to meet this demand. At the end of that month, who determines, how do we check when Thermo says I used X amount of fuel and therefore pass it on to your customer? How do you determine that?
That anytime you're buying fuel, KPLC is also part of the process. So they're cross-checking. There's a whole department of kind of credit control in KPLC.
So even before
that checks
KPLC
that.
buys the power, they already know how much the fuel costs.
They know how much the fuel costs. By the time you're getting a PPA, they know the efficiency of your engine. They know that you are running a 1,000cc car, not a 3,000cc car. Basically, all that is determined and set in the PPA, and they even the quality of the fuel, like the calorific value of the fuel, is something that is already predetermined. So they know that if you use a certain liter, it will be this calorific value and it will be this price, because they also check they are with you when you're bidding for or putting out bids for fuel. So it's not like our power plants just operate from one side and nobody is checking. So KPLC checks, and also of course the regulator would check. But coming back to her question, the thing is there's the cost of generation, which is determined by the process I talked about, feed-in tariff. And then there's the cost that you see as the consumer. And that is determined by the tariff setting process, which is what today, I guess, is being reviewed with the application from KPLC. With that, you as the consumer, you actually have a chance to go on and give your views and say, this adjustment, because there's a formula. This thing is based on a formula.
Who decides on that formula?
EPRA. This is set by the regulator. The regulator decides that if this is the fuel that you use, this is how it's passed through. If the USD to Kenya shilling rate changes by this is how it's adjusted. The WRA, whoever Water Resources Agency, this is their charge. This is not decided by the IPP. The only thing that the IPP influences is the cost of generation.
Okay. Can you just pause? Just hold the thought.
Sure.
Yes. So EPRA, essentially the government determines this.
Yes.
Now, the industry that you represent are business people.
Yes.
Okay? So doesn't what the regulator do also determine how you negotiate? Because at the end of the day, you must make a profit.
Yes, it even determines whether you want to invest in the country.
Yes, but given
You're
that the
right,
numbers are growing, it means this investment must be lucrative.
Which numbers exactly are growing?
Or the number of people who are actually producing power.
Also, again, I'm saying let's not be emotive about this. Let's try and get to
I
understand how this works.
Yes.
Are the numbers growing or not?
They are not actually, yeah. Because in
Are they
the
reducing?
last, let me tell you, in the last like maybe 5-6 years, there's been a blockage. There's been very few plants that have come on board. There has been a moratorium, and you've noted it was lifted.
It was lifted in the
2 weeks
cabinet.
ago. I personally, let me give you a personal story. I've been working in this industry, I think now for 12 years. In the last 7 years, I've been a managing director trying to develop wind, solar power plants. We applied for licenses. We secured land. You go, you talk to the landowners, you do your technical designs. But then you don't get a chance to build. And I'm telling you, companies spend 8-12 years just preparing, because there's quite a lot of delays and bureaucracy around the process of licensing projects. Even like Turkana itself, I think took 8 years plus before they could actually build. And even after they built, it took another 2 years for the responsible party to finish the transmission line. So it's not like it's a bed of roses.
No, it isn't.
Investing in power is just as difficult as any other business you're trying to run in Kenya.
I agree, George. Now, it's not an emotive issue.
Yeah.
You know, we understand the position that you have. We are just seeking to understand further your role. Because once we've understood your role, we know what the price are. We know now who else to look at. Okay? But we needed to really understand what your association does.
Yes.
So all these piercing questions are for purposes of clarity, not harassment. Okay?
No, actually, don't consider it harassment. I'm just trying to center the discussion so that we can at least have a way forward. Because often you just have people bashing IPPs. Oh, these guys are cartel. These guys are
you
cabals.
must understand that also it comes from a place where the IPPs, even as you look at it, you guys are not in a rough spot when it comes to the shilling that you pack in when it comes to these costs.
But do you understand?
You're not in a rough spot. You're not going at a loss.
But you understand that all our costs are in USD?
Why I'm saying that it looks as though it's emotive. If you look at the point of view where a Kenyan who was spending 500 shillings last year to buy power is in the rough this year for the same 500 shillings, what they're spending, IPPs are not going at a loss.
Well, they're not.
Yes.
So of course, it's a business.
No, we understand.
We get it.
And we appreciate.
So you must understand why then it comes out like that. Like folks who are providing this stuff, when you're sitting around the table, the end user is not really involved.
So it's basically, it's like the business risk is not touching you.
Not at all.
It is. I mean,
The fluctuation of the
Eric,
dollar,
I talked
the
about
cost of fuel.
I talked
all that
about
will
how
come and
PPA
you pass
works.
it on.
I talked about risk allocation. I mean, these things I've already talked about.
Your risk.
How is the
Your risk
IPP able to control?
If your machines break down and you'd already promised Kenya Power that you're going to give them X,
You pay them.
and you don't, you pay them.
Yes.
That's where the risk is. The
That's the
fluctuations
biggest
of the
risk.
market. If, for example, the oil market changes, that's not a risk for you. As long as you can access the oil, the heavy fuel,
The
and
thing
you
is,
bring it into your machine,
you have to look at it
and
from the
Kenya
point
Power
of view.
asks for power, you'll
Eric,
make your money.
Who's best placed to control that? Can an IPP control how many customers will start using power?
No.
KPLC can control that better.
Right.
Can we control the international prices of oil?
No.
Can we control how the shilling fluctuates and all that?
No.
So can the government better control it than us?
Yes, it can.
So then who should bear that risk?
The government.
Actually, by
And
the
that's
way,
exactly
Okay.
how the
George,
contract works.
The question is, and I want to ask the one, because Gadara is asking a question, on the take-or-pay agreement.
Yes.
It sounds like we, the consumer, are subsidizing you, are guaranteeing you to stay afloat. All right? So if today we don't consume power, all right, so there's no such a heavy load on Kenya Power,
Yeah.
such that Kenya Power does not come to you until you switch on your machine,
Yeah.
there's still an amount that you will be paid
Yes, and again, that's
for being in the country, for
that's
operating,
the-
for having invested in this machine.
First-
So even if we all switched off our power today,
yeah,
you will still make some money.
and that's the risk of demand. Is the IPP able to control or say that this guy will switch off his machines or will turn them on?
No.
But Kenya Power is better placed because Kenya Power has connected all you guys. They know how you behave. They know when you wake up based on how you use your power. And they are better able to project demand. So if they project demand and they come and tell me, like car hire, you come and tell me that you want to drive to Isiolo. As the car hire guy, I'll say, okay, to drive to Isiolo, I'll give you this car, this is the risk, and this is the price. Then you decide, I'm not going to Isiolo. Do you come back to the car hire guy and tell them that, hey, I'm not going to Isiolo, so this is unfair, I should not be paying for
The
this?
point here is
Yeah.
that the car is not in the car hire's yard. The car has, from the beginning of this
It's-
conversation, the
yes.
car is with the customer.
Exactly.
So the customer must pay. Whether he moves the car or,
Or
not,
not.
the customer must pay. Now, that's not a risky business for the car hire
Guy
guy.
gets his buck regardless.
Let me tell you,
So if CT
by the time you get there,
is born and he has a car outside his house,
Yeah.
he'll start paying for that car outside his house.
if CT determines,
why is CT being forced to have the car outside his house?
he's not being forced.
Actually,
I mean,
I'm
CT has says,
you
he
don't
said,
use
I
it,
need the
you're
car.
in the
I
dark.
need a car.
I'm actually not being forced. I agree with you completely. I am
He's
the one
not
who
being
decided.
forced. He decided
No.
he needs a car.
You found
Put a
the
car. He didn't find it.
As a consumer of power, I did not decide that I needed IPPs. Okay? Somebody else decided that I needed IPP. The person who decided that I needed IPP
Yeah.
is making me pay for them having decided that I need IPPs. That's the point of the
Eric,
take or pay.
Yes, but
No,
That's what it
no.
sounds like.
Eric, you know something? The point you
That
make
Kenya
is
Power
valid.
should bear the cost. That basic cost.
Not Kenya Power. It's the customer, actually, to be
see?
honest. Huh? It's the customer because Kenya Power determines how the customers grow. Kenya Power and the
Now,
sector.
if Kenya Power mismanages its own processes,
Now, if the planning is
and
mismanaged,
that's,
that's
the point.
another thing. Huh?
They should bear the cost.
Who's they?
Kenya Power,
Kenya Power.
and lighting
People that you sit
company
with around that table.
By
limited.
the
You
way,
guys are
by the way, George, George, when are you coming back? When are you coming
You
back
should
again?
come back.
You tell me when I should come back
We
because I
might-
think we can't cover this in
We can't.
in an hour. But just
We can't.
quickly,
We've
Eric.
we've run out of time, actually. We are already at the top of the hour. George will come back. George Aluru is the chairman of the Electricity Sector Association of Kenya. He will be back. Yeah, Tony, I can see you're saying, let's give this guy more time. We'll give you more time. Come back.